The year was 1931. The world was still recovering from the Great War, but the skis were alive with the sound of new machines. Across the airfields of Britain, young men dreamed of flying, of breaking the clouds and touching freedom itself. Among them was a daring young pilot named Douglas Bader. He was only 21, confident, charming, and utterly fearless. To him, flying was not just a career, it was life itself. Bader joined the Royal Air Force as a cadet, and from the very first day, his instructors saw something different in him. He wasn't just skilled, he was bold, sometimes recklessly so. He pushed aircraft beyond their limits, always wanting to feel that rush of danger. For Douglas, fear was something to fight, not to feel. In those early days, the RAF was a tight-knit brotherhood. Pilots would spend their days training and their nights in the mess hall, sharing laughter, stories, and whiskey. They were all young, all invincible, or at least they believed so. Then came that fateful day. It was December 14th, 1931. The skies above Reading were clear, and the air buzzed with excitement. A small crowd had gathered to watch a demonstration flight, a show of skill and daring. Douglas Bader climbed into his Bristol Bulldog fighter, confident as ever. He had flown stunts 100 times before, but this time he decided to push harder, go lower, fly sharper. As he dove into a low roll, the aircraft clipped the ground. The impact was brutal. The plane cartwheeled and exploded into fire. By the time rescuers reached him, his body was mangled, his legs crushed beyond saving. He should have died that day, but somehow he didn't. Douglas Bader woke up in the hospital days later, wrapped in bandages, the sound of engines replaced by silence. When he realized his legs were gone, the world turned black. The doctors told him he would never walk again, and certainly never fly. For weeks he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trapped between pain and disbelief. But slowly, something inside him began to burn again, that same fire that once made him defy gravity. If he couldn't change what had happened, he would master it. He started to learn to walk again, first with crutches, then with 2 artificial legs made of steel and leather. Every step was agony, every movement was a battle, but he refused to surrender. Nurses would hear him gritting his teeth, dragging himself down the hospital corridor, forcing his body to obey. Within months, he was walking again. Within a year, he was playing golf. And within 2, he was knocking on the doors of the RAF, asking to return to the sky. They thought he was insane. A man with no legs couldn't control a fighter plane. The pedals alone required perfect coordination. But Douglas didn't accept impossibility. He trained in secret, memorizing every control, every movement. Finally, he convinced them to let him take a test flight. The day he climbed back into a cockpit, the world went quiet. The mechanics watched as he strapped himself in 2 metal legs resting against the rudder pedals. The engine roared, the propeller spun, and within seconds he was airborne. The moment the wheels left the ground, he was free again. But the bureaucracy of peacetime didn't favor miracles. The RAF couldn't officially allow a double amputee to fly. They thanked him for his service and discharged him. And so Douglas Bader returned to civilian life. He worked in an oil company, played golf, and tried to move on. But a pilot never truly leaves the sky. He spent his days staring up whenever an aircraft passed overhead, wondering if his life's purpose had ended too soon. Then history changed everything. September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The world was at war again. Within days, Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. The RAF, once calm and quiet, was now desperate for pilots. And that's when Douglas Bader walked back into their offices, this time not asking, but demanding, to rejoin. They were hesitant, but they needed men. His determination broke through every wall of doubt. He was given a chance, one more chance to do what he was born for. Bader began retraining on the new Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire fighters. These were faster, deadlier, and far more advanced than the old biplanes he had once flown. And yet, within weeks, he was outperforming men half his age, men with all their limbs intact. The secret was in his precision. His artificial legs, unlike human flesh, never cramped under G-force. His control was mechanical, steady, unshaken. Pilots began whispering stories that the man with metal legs could outfly anyone in the squadron. Soon, he was promoted to squadron leader of No. 242 Squadron, composed mainly of Canadian pilots. His leadership was firm but fair. He believed in discipline, teamwork, and courage above all. He wasn't gentle, but his men trusted him with their lives. Then came 1940, the Battle of Britain. The skies over England turned into a war zone. German bombers rained fire on London and southern cities, escorted by deadly Messerschmitt fighters. The RAF scrambled daily to defend the homeland. Every dawn meant new death, new losses, and new legends. Douglas Bader's squadron was sent to the front lines. Day after day, he led his men into the sky, facing impossible odds. He didn't just command from a radio, he fought alongside them. The roar of engines, the thunder of guns, the smoke trails crossing the clouds, that was his orchestra of war. Once during a fierce dogfight, his plane was riddled with bullets. The canopy shattered, instruments exploded, and a piece of metal tore through the cockpit, but Bader stayed in control. When he landed, ground crew found holes all across the fuselage and blood on his flight suit. He just laughed, saying, "Nothing a bit of tape won't fix." His men loved him, not because he was perfect, but because he was fearless. He inspired them to keep flying when death felt inevitable. He had a rule: never think of yourself as disabled. Think of yourself as challenged, and challenges are meant to be defeated. As the Battle of Britain raged on, Bader became a symbol of defiance. Newspapers wrote about him, calling him the man who fights without legs. But Douglas didn't care about fame, only about victory. By late 1940, he had downed multiple German aircraft and earned the Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Flying Cross. His name was known across the RAF, but deep down he knew this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and the skies above Europe were turning darker every day. France had already fallen, and now Hitler's eyes were on Britain. For Douglas Bader, the fight was no longer about medals or survival. It was about proving that courage had no limits, that a man's spirit could soar even when his body could not. He often stood at the airfield at dusk, watching the last planes land. The sky would burn orange, smoke drifting from the horizon. In that light, the metal on his legs glowed faintly, like steel forged in the heart of battle. He would smile, a calm, confident smile, knowing that tomorrow he'd be back in the air. Because for Douglas Bader, the sky wasn't just a place to fly. It was home. The skies over Europe were burning again. By 1941, the war had entered a darker, deadlier phase. The Battle of Britain had ended, but for Douglas Bader, it was only the beginning of a new fight. The man who had once defied gravity was now leading squadrons into the heart of the enemy's territory. His prosthetic legs, his unbreakable spirit, and his unmatched courage had already turned him into a living legend. But destiny wasn't done testing him yet. Every morning, the pilots of the Royal Air Force stood ready, waiting for the call that would send them into the blue, a blue that could turn red in seconds. The Germans were preparing massive raids over northern France. It was there, high above the clouds, that Bader's legend would take its final shape. He had become a leader not just because of his rank, but because men trusted him. They trusted his judgment, his calm, his defiance. He had a way of making danger look like routine, of turning fear into focus. Before every mission, he would joke, smile, and inspire his men. "Remember," he would say, "you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting so that others may live free." On August 9, 1941, Bader's squadron took off from Tangmere Airfield. The sun had barely risen, casting long golden beams over the English Channel. The engines of the Spitfires roared like thunder. Ahead of them lay France, occupied, fortified, and deadly. Their mission: sweep the skies and draw the Luftwaffe into combat. As they crossed into enemy territory, Bader could see the coastline below, dotted with anti-aircraft guns and smoke from distant fires. The radio crackled. Enemy aircraft, 12 o'clock, high. In seconds, the calm of the morning shattered. Messerschmitts dived from the sun, and the air exploded with gunfire. Bader banked hard left, his machine slicing through the air. His Spitfire shook as bullets grazed its wings. He turned inside the German formation and opened fire. One Messerschmitt burst into flames and spiraled downward. His men followed his lead, fighting fiercely, courage matching courage in a deadly ballet of steel and fire. But in the chaos, disaster struck. Bader's aircraft shuddered violently. A sudden impact. His controls went dead. Smoke filled the cockpit. "I've been hit," he radioed, calm but sharp. The smell of burning fuel filled his lungs. He tried to eject, but his right artificial leg got trapped under the seat. The plane was spinning toward the ground at terrifying speed. He fought the straps, tore them free, and finally managed to push himself out. The wind tore at his body. As he fell, he realized his right leg had gone, ripped away in the explosion. Only one artificial limb remained attached. The earth rushed closer. He pulled his parachute. The canopy opened with a violent jerk, and for a moment there was silence, just the sound of wind and his heart pounding. Then impact. He hit the ground hard in a French field, surrounded by wheat and smoke. His left leg was twisted, his right one gone. Pain surged through him. Before he could crawl to cover, he heard voices, German soldiers shouting, running toward him. He reached for his pistol, but his strength failed. Within minutes, he was surrounded, rifles aimed at his chest. The German officer who approached him looked astonished. "You are the British pilot," he he asked in disbelief. Bader nodded weakly. The officer's eyes dropped to the missing leg, and for a moment there was silence. Then the officer simply said, "For you, the war is over." But for Douglas Bader, it was never over. He was taken to a German hospital near St. Omer. The doctors, amazed at his survival, treated him with unexpected respect. Word spread quickly: the legless British ace had been captured alive. Even his enemies couldn't help but admire him. When the Luftwaffe's top ace, General Adolf Galland, heard the news, he requested to meet him personally. Galland entered the hospital room in his flight uniform, cigarette in hand. "You gave us quite a chase," he said with a grin. Bader, ever defiant, replied, "Next time I'll make it longer." Both men laughed, enemies, yet pilots who understood each other. But Bader was restless. Imprisonment was never part of his spirit. He immediately began planning his escape. When British authorities learned that his artificial leg had been lost in the crash, they contacted the Germans through the Red Cross. In a rare act of wartime chivalry, the Royal Air Force dropped a new prosthetic leg by parachute over the hospital, attached to a bomb bay of a bomber labeled "Gift for Bader." Even the Germans smiled at that. They retrieved it and gave it to him. But as soon as he could walk again, Bader tried to flee. Crawling through windows, hiding in attics, limping across fields, he made several attempts, each one more daring than the last. The Germans, impressed but exasperated, finally sent him to Colditz Castle, the most secure prisoner of war camp in Germany, a place where only the most troublesome Allied officers were kept. At Colditz, Bader became a symbol of resistance. He organized lectures, trained other prisoners, and planned endless escape schemes. His courage infected everyone around him. Guards began to respect him. Prisoners began to believe again. Even without a cockpit, he led men, the same way he had in the air. He would stand by the barred window, staring at the sky every morning, whispering, "One day, I'll fly again." Years passed, the war turned. Germany began to fall back, the Allies returned to France. And finally, in April 1945, the gates of Colditz were opened by American forces. Bader, older but unbroken, limped out of the castle into the sunlight of freedom. When he returned to Britain, crowds cheered his name. To them, he was not just a pilot. He was proof that the human spirit could not be grounded. In a time when the world was burning, he had shown what it meant to rise. After the war, he dedicated his life to helping disabled veterans and young pilots. He refused sympathy, refused pity. "Don't listen to the ones who tell you what you can't do," he would say. "Decide for yourself what's possible." And in his quiet moments, when no one was watching, he would still look at the sky, that endless blue where he had once danced with death and found life. Douglas Bader died peacefully in 1982, but his story, his fight, his fire, his will, still lives in the air he once ruled. They say heroes are born in battle, but Bader proved something greater. That true heroes are the ones who never stop fighting, even when the battle seems lost. Because for Douglas Bader, the war was never about killing the enemy. It was about conquering fear. And that he did.